Lightning continued to roll through the sky angrily, matching that of the demonist that summoned it. "What do you want me from me?" Wednesday screamed at the sky. She knew he could hear her, and she was tired, so very tired of the games, of the manipulation. The image of her and Enid's firstborn continued to haunt her waking thoughts. Lightning lashed the ground in front of her, causing explosions in the dirt, and sending leaves floating back down to earth in their wake. Wednesday fell to her knees. Her resolve had finally crumbled. Enid had ran from her. She was shown a future that couldn't possibly be real. She was done. Tears fell in streaks from her bloodshot and diseased eyes. And a sob was ripped from her throat as the ground was bathed in her rage. There were a few more booming sounds of thunder that had started to fade away, as rain began to fall to earth, all matching the emotion of the one who conjured it. "All I want to do is love her," she called up pitifully. There was still no answer. There were footsteps behind her. "Wednesday?" the voice said. Wednesday turned to gaze at the vampire, who looked down at her, soaking wet and pitiful. "Wednesday, come inside," the vampire said gently, holding out a hand to the demon. "Why? Why bother? This is all meaningless. Leave me here. Take care of Enid for me. I'm done. I can't win." Wednesday said, her eyes shifting back towards the sky. "Not against him." She sighed in defeat. Yoko fell to her knees in front of Wednesday, whose eyes, bloodshot and diseased, did not meet hers. Her own uniform becoming soaked, but the vampire barely felt it. "What happened?" she asked. "I was shown a vision," Wednesday said bitterly. "I was shown a future, a beautiful future, one of hope and love and happiness." As Wednesday spoke, Yoko listened. "He showed a time where Enid and I—" Wednesday bit back. The vision was clear as day in her memory. She could almost feel Enigma Adams in her arms even as she watched. She could almost feel it, until it was ripped away. "Where Enid and you what?" Yoko pushed. She had seen Enid in tears as well. The blonde had passed by her in a blur and out of sight straight back up to her dorm. "We had a child, Yoko." Wednesday uttered the words that had shattered her. Yoko's eyes widened and she took a step back. "He showed me a future where Enid and I—" Wednesday swallowed her words before raising her hand and calling to her angel blade. It shook a little before answering the call of its master. She gazed at her angel blade and stared at it for a moment before slipping it back into her sleeve. "Enid saw it, didn't she?" Yoko inferred. "I assume so. It was triggered when she kissed my forehead after she won her phone back." Yoko shook her head. "Enid always had a way with her actions." Wednesday rose to her feet and the two began to walk back towards Nevermore. The rain had slowed to a drizzle as they entered the school. Wednesday waved her hand and suddenly both girls were bone dry. Wednesday's eyes had returned to their normal black. "Please make no mention of my weakness before." Wednesday considered her words for a moment. "It was unbecoming of me." "Hey, look, I get it," Yoko insisted. "It's not every day you see the future of you and someone you love." Yoko's eyes glittered as she looked towards the staircase that led to Ophelia Hall. "Now go get your girl, Adams." Wednesday took a single pace forward, before turning on the spot to regard the vampire. "Thank you, I'm glad to see humans or their half-breed equivalents aren't a total loss." Yoko smiled at the backhanded compliment before fully realizing what Wednesday had. "Wait, what the fuck did you just say, Adams?" Yoko exclaimed. Wednesday, without breaking stride, spun on her heel, and gave a flick of her wrist in a sarcastic wave, before resuming her course up to her door, leaving a stunned Yoko in her wake. Wednesday carefully climbed the steps up to her new dorm. Her footfalls felt like heavy weights hitting the ocean floor, sending dust and particles in their wake. The mahogany door stood and represented the only path that she could take right now. It taunted her with its fine finishings, carefully crafted carvings and polished wood. Her fingers flexed. She could sense the blip of light beyond the door, in the corner of their part of the room. Her gaze dipped towards the floor. She could feel the distress that Enid was feeling. Of the future that could never be. Wednesday took a step forwards, feet dragging along. She dreaded this. If this whole thing went south, then the angels wouldn't have to drag her down back to the abyss. She would do it herself. Her hand grasped the knob, the creak of the hinges all too loud as she creaked the door open, letting out a blast of aroma that was so truthfully Enid, and Wednesday was merely lucky enough to bask and inhale such a scent. Inhaling it like a drug, it tingled in her nose as she stepped through the precipice and let the door close all too softly behind her. Wednesday's eyes softened. They rested on the body that lay on the bed. She came to the center of the room. Enid's eyes shifted slightly. showing that she acknowledged the demonist's presence. "We should talk," Wednesday said softly. Enid scoffed humorlessly. "About what, Wednesday? Why, I feel like I know you when I only met you today." "Or why?" Enid said, staring at the ceiling. Unable to complete her sentence, the memory of what came before still too raw. Wednesday swallowed nervously. "I haven't been entirely honest with you." "Understatement, Wednesday," Enid snapped. Her eyes met hers and they were red and puffy. The obvious signs of crying. "There are things I want to tell you, that I need to tell you," Wednesday began, watching Enid throw her legs round her bed and onto the floor, as she stood up to face her. "Like what?" Her stare was intense but pleading, pleading to understand, pleading to know so that her heart may rest. Wednesday felt her resolve steel itself. She would tell her, not everything but things she needed to know. She was tired of hiding, tired of pining. If Enid were to break her heart, she would have her do it here and now. The vision they shared still haunted her. And she needed Enid to understand. "I can't tell you," Wednesday said, and Enid, fed up, turned away, but Wednesday reached out a hand to grasp the sleeve of Enid's uniform. Enid's eyes searched hers questioningly. She felt herself unravel at the sight. She wanted to spread her arms and tell Enid to do as she wished. She felt naked before her. Every bottled-up emotion would fall before her in submission. "But I can show you? If you'll allow me?" Wednesday said, taking a step forwards. Enid took a step forwards, of her own, eyes never leaving the other girl's. Enid nodded and moved forwards. "How?" she whispered. Both of them were within feet of each other, close enough to feel the breath from each other as they exhaled. Same as before, through a moment of intimacy. Wednesday uttered, her heart racing. Enid's eyes flickered to the top of Wednesday's forehead, where not half an hour ago she had planted her lips against before. Wednesday followed her gaze and wanted to bite her lip. But as Enid moved closer, Wednesday could not stop what happened next. Not even God himself would have had that power. Wednesday crashed her lips against Enid's. Lips fighting for dominance. Wednesday felt her heart flutter away. She no longer needed it. She had felt the shattering of her universe, as powers beyond either of their comprehension rejoiced in their union. Wednesday felt her magic surge as Enid deepened the kiss, both working to induce the vision and to make sure her lips never left the one she fought to be here with. The lights in the dorm burst in a shower of sparks. Wednesday's cello case slammed into the floor. Enid brought her hands up to interwove her fingers in ebony hair. She pulled them backwards, falling onto her blonde's bed as Wednesday's magics pulled them under and into the vision. Enid watched. It was all she could do. Watch as her mother slapped her face harshly. "You're a fucking disappointment," the older woman seethed. 14 and still unable to wolf out. She remembered that day. But not like this. Her eyes turned to see the phantom figure of Wednesday watching. This was Wednesday of the past, watching her get abused. Enid turned to watch her crying self. As the image burned itself away like paper crumpling in on itself as it burned, only be replaced by another image and another, she had been told her new roommate was a psychic. But she never imagined it was like this. It was that night when Enid had been thrown out into the yard, and locked out. At this point she couldn't even remember why the reasons for her abuse varied and seemed to blur together after a while. She watched as Wednesday's face grew ferocious in anger. She watched as the girl stepped away from the shed, fingers curling into fists, casting her gaze up to the sky. "You could stop this if you wanted, couldn't you?" she spat out. There was only silence. "That's if you wanted to, if you were as all-loving as you claimed to be." Who was she talking to? There was no one else in the vision with her, no one else that Enid could see. "If you don't do something, then I will, and it will be bloody," she growled out. There was still silence. "Fine. You leave me no choice. I will do what must be done." Wednesday turned to regard the shed before her, where the wolf lay within, where Enid was staring at the wall, lost in her despair. "I'm coming, Mia Lupa," she had said softly, and the girl vanished from sight. That was 2 years before now. Enid suddenly realized. Wednesday was the girl that appeared to her briefly in a dream one night, who said that they were both dreaming and she was there because she was psychic, but even then she felt like she had known her before, in some capacity, in some way. Enid smiled fondly as she watched Enigma the Raven come into her life. The name she would eventually settle on for her firstborn. She had torn herself away from Wednesday because the love she had felt there was all-powerful, it was overwhelming. She felt like because of her failure to wolf out she didn't deserve to be loved. It was the night where she embarrassed her family in front of the Pack Alpha. She had cried herself to sleep that night, and she remembered crying herself to sleep that night, not like it wasn't the norm at that point. Enigma had come soaring in through a gap in the shed before landing by her chest, where she gently scooped the bird into her arms and hugged it until she watched herself fall asleep. What she saw next shook her entire world. Enigma, the bird that she had grown to love, a companion that had been her side for that entire summer, shifted, bones cracked and the body morphed, almost impossibly so. And there stood in her shed, her doghouse, as her mother cruelly called it, Wednesday Addams. In the flesh. Her heart raced. This wasn't how she wanted Wednesday to see her, pathetic. She was pathetic. Being forced to sleep in the shed like a naughty, misbehaving dog. Not worthy to be loved, not worthy enough to be loved by her own family because every time she wanted to be loved, she was punished. She watched Wednesday fall to her knees, her head turned round to stare at the house, her face awash with pure hatred and rage, her black eyes sharp as obsidian and deep as the void turned to face Enid's sleeping form again. Enid felt her stomach do flips as Wednesday reached out a pale hand, fingers lightly tracing the tear streaks on cheeks, such tender touches that it chills racing down her spine as her sleeping past self tried to chase and lean into Wednesday's fingers. "My wolf, what has she done to you?" Enid felt herself fall further into the abyss for Wednesday. There was attraction there, a small crush, but now it burst aflame, a flame that could, and only would burn for Wednesday. "Mate," her wolf growled. "Mate." And Enid, the girl who felt too much, who would fall too far, fell further than she thought possible, the abyss calling to her, and she would answer and fall forever. For her. Wednesday's lips were still pressed against hers as they came to. Enid almost choked back a sob, her arms encircling the goth. Enid felt tears race down her cheeks, wanting nothing more than to melt into the kiss, but Wednesday pulled away, eliciting a whimper from the walking rainbow. "You were Enigma?" she choked out, not letting Wednesday pull further away. Wednesday merely nodded in return, creating a fresh wave of tears. Wednesday reached up with a hand, fingers hovering over Enid's face. The other girl grabbed her hand, pressed her palm against her cheek. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I had to protect you, Enid, I had to. Why me? I don't deserve it." Enid's despair burst from the proverbial bottle. Wednesday understood the words that she couldn't say. "I don't deserve to be loved." "You deserve everything, Enid. Do you know what I saw every time I saw you?" Wednesday whispered, desperately trying to clot the self-hatred coming off of Enid in waves. Enid shook her head. "No. I do," Wednesday whispered, cupping the back of Enid's head. "Something that deserves to be loved." Wednesday captured her lips again, as Enid choked back tears. Taking her left hand with her right, she interlocked their fingers, as Wednesday poured every ounce of love and affection into their joined lips. Enid couldn't help but chuckle as they lay down together on the bed. Wednesday cradling the blonde's head to her chest as she fell asleep. The two would enjoy their peace for now, unaware of the dove glaring at them from the window. When Wednesday awoke, it was now dusk. Her new uniform and schedule had been placed on her desk, courtesy of Yoko. She would have to thank her later. She carefully removed herself from Enid's arms, the young werewolf whimpering as she felt her companion leave her, but she did not awake. Wednesday stiffened and her head slowly turned. Sat perched on the balcony was a dove, pure white in color. Her eyes hardened, it turned around and took flight, diving towards the forest and out of sight. Wednesday turned to look at the sleeping Enid. She seemed to watch her sleep a lot lately, she mused before walking forwards, through their multi-pane window. Shutting it behind, she climbed up onto the stone railing before letting herself fall. Her skeletal raven wings beat against gravity, allowing her to free fall gently, following the dove. She didn't need to see it, she could feel the grace of whom it belonged to. She padded through the forest until came to a clearing, a cliff that overlooked the forest. Ishmael stood, his back to her, wings furled behind his back, as he stood to watch the sunset. Wind rustling through his feathers as took in such majesty. Wednesday cautiously came up to stand beside her brother, and both light and dark stood in tandem watching the world give way to darkness so that light may rise once again. "It's time, Wednesday," he spoke softly. "I know," she replied, her eyes never leaving the sun. He hummed in affirmation. "You should have come with me before, when you still had the chance to avoid all this," he said, finally turning to regard his sister. "You know me, happy to disappoint, brother." His wings unfurled and he flung himself backwards as Wednesday's angel blade came swiping downwards where he had just stood. He will not tolerate your disobedience any longer, Wednesday. I don't care what he fucking thinks. Wednesday hissed, angel blade glittering dangerous in the orange light of the setting sun. Your wings, he said mournfully, noting their skeletal appearance. They would have helped you now. He lamented, his sword being brought to bear. It was thrice as long as Wednesday's angel blade, being more comparable to a dagger than a sword. She readied it in front of her all the same. He shouldn't have sent you. I'm going to rip you apart. Wednesday growled, her smile manic, her eyes shifting red, bloodshot and diseased. Ishmael swooped down, sword held abreast. There was a clatter as blades collided as he glided past. Rolling onto his feet, he squared up, elbows bent, sword pointing towards his foe. Wednesday charged forwards. Her feet left the ground, her wings, broken, molting, tattered and decomposing, propelled her into the air, bringing the blade down. Ishmael rolled out of the way but couldn't avoid her fist as it collided with his jaw. Ishmael stumbled, and Wednesday pressed her attack. Their blades clattered as Wednesday thrust and swiped. Ishmael, with a much bigger sword, managed to parry or dodge her much faster strikes, but her weapon didn't have the reach his did. She was forced to sidestep a strong downward strike, and before it could hit the ground, he shifted its trajectory, turning its momentum into a faster and heavier hitting sideswipe. Wednesday brought her blade up in time as the sword struck it, but the blade shattered on impact, sending shining shards around in an explosion as his sword embedded itself into her side. She cried out in anguish as the ethereal metal not only damaged her body but her grace too. Ishmael pulled and the blade came free, causing her sulfur-laced blood to spray out onto the grass. She fell to her knees, never having felt such pain. Angel weapons were the only thing capable of harming her. She clutched at her side as both light and blood leaked from the wound. Ishmael sighed as he sheathed his sword. It didn't have to be this way, he said sadly. I'm sorry, Serial. His eyes full of pity for the sister he was sent down to damn once again. Wednesday, through mind-splitting pain, glared with hatred at her brother who looked down upon her. I told you I renounced that name, she hissed. She lashed out with the broken hilt of her blade which pierced his flesh and forced him to his knees. But she was weak, her grace leaking, her power waned. Ishmael struck her with a fist, making her see stars. She stumbled backwards as he angrily stood over her, ripping the broken hilt from his chest. Back to the abyss with you. His hand outstretched to take her into his grasp, and Wednesday, ever weakening, accepted her fate. A deep howling brought both their heads up, gazing into the darkened forest. Trees were being felled, the echoes of their falls sending vibrations to the ground. Ishmael placed a hand on the hilt of his blade as he stood back up. What in the name of... He couldn't finish his sentence. Bounding footsteps reached them at blinding speeds, taking even the wounded angel by surprise as a huge snarling beast bodied him before he could even withdraw his sword, sending him flying back and over the cliff. The snarling beast stood up on its hind legs, snarling, saliva dripping from its maw. Wednesday stumbled to her feet, her eyes wide with astonishment. Enid? The wolf in question spun its head, bright blue eyes boring into hers. The wolf fell back onto all fours, padding up to Wednesday. The wolf whimpered, snout moving down to inspect the wound on Wednesday's side, tongue coming out to lick it. Enid, stop. Enid, she huffed. Enid, you silly dog. Enid turned to look up at Wednesday with a softness one couldn't imagine coming from such a ferocious creature. She brought her hands up to cup Enid's muzzle. I'm okay, she said, trying to give a reassuring smile. Abomination! The angel's voice screeched as Ishmael landed on the cliff edge, sword brandished. The wolf snarled, teeth bared as the wolf slowly moved sideways in front of Wednesday, blocking her from the angel's view. The wolf raised proudly on its hind legs. Claws extended. The wolf would fight for its mate. The wolf would die for its mate. If need be.